works for the committee. I'm going to cover the budget summary real quick, talk a little bit about what's in 2007, and then surrender the mic to the directors to talk about the budgets. So all of this information was already presented to the interim committee on legislative budget. There's just a couple of adjustments in 2007 that we'll probably want to touch on. So if you look at the legislature and turn immediately to page 2, you can see that it's an all funds increase of about 15% above the approved, but that increase is as a result of budgeting the ARPA funds for the ks project. Is what that is. And those monies had already been appropriated for that purpose. They simply had not yet been inserted into the budget. And so that's what this does. There is a $6.9 million SGF reappropriation, or $7.8 million SGF reappropriation for the legislature at the recommendation of the LBC. $6.9 million of that was lapsed. That is the operational costs that are inside the legislature's budget. It left ks untouched. So ks has a separate SGF account, and so it sort of left that alone. That was at the recommendation of the LBC. If you turn to page 3, I just briefly talk about all other adjustments, which is no increase, but it does mention that there's 3.1 million SGF put in here to implement the legislative pay plan. If it's all right with you, I'll just move immediately to FY26.
That's fine.
So FY 2026 is a $9.3 million increase above the approved. That's about 36.4%. That's because we compare it to the approved without reappropriations. So we basically back out reappropriations at the request of the interim LBC committee. So there's several changes that are going on here. Item 1 is the CISO. So there's 167,358 SGF and 1 FTE position put into the budget. This is in response to SB 291, which required each branch of government to have its own CISO. That was removed by the Legislative Budget Committee as part of the global. So any added FTE and associated salaries for that were deleted. So that was deleted for the LBC. There's an addition of $7.3 million SGF to fully fund the legislative pay plan. All right. There's a deletion of $226,000 for legislative laptops. And the reason that's done that way is because in FY 2025, the Legislative Coordinating Council elected to purchase the laptops rather than leasing them, so we're just reversing them out in the following fiscal year. There's an addition of $40,000 for VMware for data center server management coming out of ks. There's an addition of $140,000 SGF to upgrade the Microsoft 365 licenses to G5, and that's to support agency and legislative initiatives. On other agency fees, you have about 1.8 million SGF and other professional fees for FY 2026. So those funds are to pursue various legislative initiatives, such as ks modernization, the constituent management relationship software, bill tracking software, and any other legislative initiatives that may come up. All other adjustments is about $69,000 and other little tweaks and adjustments that may have occurred subsequent to that. On page 6, you can see sort of the history of expenditures from over the last 10 years. But with that, I would stand for questions. And I would actually stand for questions fully on the legislature's budget because you are the directors for this particular agency.
All right, thank you. So going back to page 2 in regards to the reappropriation. So we took out the 6.9 million with the reappropriation, bulk reappropriation, and you're saying that this is a need for operating expenditures?
So there's a couple different things that are going on there. There's the constituent management relationship software is funded through this. You're looking at about $1 million over 2 years. Possible bill tracking software is in there. Plus, this year we tend to see some increased expenditures in the legislature for stationery and stuff like that. Also, historically, the legislature has carried a relatively substantial reappropriation, and that's only because you never know how many days it's going to go. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about it being a shorter session this year, but the legislature has always had a relatively large reappropriation, just in case we run all the way through June. And the number, it just depends on the number of days. Now, that's a little bit different this year because legislators get paid more of a fixed rate, okay, as opposed to a daily rate. However, you do incur costs for committee assistants and all the other different sort of things costs you incur during a legislative session.
So what would be the dollar amount if we were to lapse some of that reappropriation back for those items that you mentioned for the constituent services system, bill tracker, stationery, all those other items that you mentioned?
So if you were to keep that, if you take maybe half, so bring that to about like $3.5 million, keep about $3.5 million in the budget, you'll be secure and have that sort of cushion just in case the session runs a little long.
Which we don't anticipate it running a little long, so.
No, but I do think it's
3.5. Speaker Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think it's probably smart for us to keep a little cushion. I think we're pretty good at staying within our means, but to not have that available, and you never do know what pops up. There's always things that pop up for us that we don't even have to see coming, so.
So I would probably make a motion to put 3.5 million of the 6.9 back from the reappropriation into the legislature budget.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Speaker Hawkins. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll move my motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to look at number 3 on 2. Would you explain a little bit more about the ARPA funds project?
Certainly. I think it was 3 years ago, there was ARPA funds that were appropriated to do the KLIS modernization project. And so that was allocated along with all the other one-time spending that was determined. Of course, we're seeing some delays in the implementation of that KLIS modernization. That system will allow a new budget, bill development system inside the revisor's office. It allows a new document management system inside of KLRD. The floor chambers are all going to be like adjusted, and this is sort of paying for those costs.
Well, and one thing that I would say, and we kind of walked through this with the Special Committee on Legislative Budget, was that these one-time spends, it looked like it was like another item being asked for, but it's just authorizing the money to go towards the system. Is that?
That's exactly correct. This was dedicated to this purpose through the Spark process like 2 years ago.
So we're just taking the money out of the ARPA account and actually directing it towards it, but it's showing up as kind of like an enhancement.
And I don't want to correct you. This was actually stuck into a legislative account originally. It's just we haven't actually put it in the budget.
Right, yeah.
So we have to put it in IBARs, and now we kind of have a better idea of when those actual spends are going, and that's why it's getting put into the budget.
Was that? So
Representative
would that be 2026?
So it's being put in 2025. It's in the current fiscal year. That work is ongoing currently.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speaker Pro Tem Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 1 on page 4. So this is in regards to the CISO, and I see that it was asked for an enhancement, but then it was deleted out. So I guess my question is, with Senate Bill 291 that's out there, I know that it requires a CISO at some point, but are we ensuring that the legislature is at least still making progress in regard to our cyber and just our overall health of our information systems?
Yes, sir. So with permission, Mr. Chair, those efforts are still ongoing inside of KLOIS in order to do that increased cybersecurity. It's just the bill was very specific about the language, and so it was drafted with this CISO position that was added to it.
So how was the $167,358 derived?
So we assumed $120,000 for a CISO because it was just a number. Of course, we don't know exactly that cost, and then added benefits on top of that.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so the $7.3 million SGF that was added for the legislative salaries, that is the total increase from 2024?
From 2024, that's correct. So, and that is the full year implementation. In 25, since the salaries begin in January, you only have a half-year implementation. And so this is a full year implementation of those salary adjustments.
Okay.
I would, with the permission of the chair, mention one other item, just to treat all agencies equivalently. There was a request by the chairman for a 7.5% reduced resource proposal. That in FY26 would be about $2.6 million out of the legislature's budget in FY 2026. You know, I just want to leave it up to this committee, you know, if you want to adopt that. Of course, those are just proposals. If you were to do that, you would probably be looking at cuts in operating expenditures, maybe some limitations on rollout of new legislative initiatives.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you kind of elaborate what those resources are?
I mean, you know, you have you know, if you kind of look at your legislative budget from the first page, okay, you have about $17.4 million. If you're looking at 2025, let's look at 26. You have about $20 million of that salaries and wages. You're looking at about $14 million in contractual services. You would likely be taking it out of this contractual services line. A lot of that is KLOIS and a lot of the OITS fees and everything like that that flows inside of this budget. Like I said, I mean, it is an option to make those reductions or a partial reduction if you wanted to go with that. I would note that if you do decide to make adjustments to 26, there's still another bite at the apple. That's the next budget year. So if you were to get to it and you were to learn that there were some additional appropriations that needed to happen, you do have that opportunity.
I would say at this moment, and we were just making sure that all agencies and departments were going to try to find some type of 7.5%, you know, efficiency proposal within their budgets. I think legislature is a little bit different than some of the big agencies that we were actually kind of targeting that towards. I would say if you could find some amount, maybe not 7.5%, but some, we don't want to cut into resources that we rely on and then come back later and say, okay, well, we need to go ahead and fund this at a level. But if you can identify any type of cost savings, I think that'd be beneficial.
I can bring up a couple of proposals to this committee if you like. A 3% cut would be about $1 million, is what a 3% cut would be. I mean, if you want to go with, you know, like a 1% cut, that'd be about $500,000. And there's probably $500,000 in contractual service reductions that could be done in the FY26 budget.
I mean, we're still, I mean, in fiscal year 2025, we're still pulling back $3.4 million that we allocated in the budget.
I'm not pushing it. I'm just saying you have these options if you wish.
Right. Speaker Hawkins.
The one thing I would say, it's kind of bad when we don't do anything and we're asking other agencies to do something, so I think it's pretty wise that we do something. I think probably 500,000 is a good number.
You want to make that a motion?
I move that our effort to trim our budget will trim 500,000 out of contractual services.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Representative Williams. Discussion on the motion. Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a possibility that we could get a list of contractual services at some point?
Certainly, I can share that with the committee.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none. Speaker, you may close.
I close.
All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything else regarding the legislature for fiscal year 25 and 26? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to pass this out to appropriations. Speaker.
Mr. Chair, I move that we pass the legislative budget out to appropriations.
All right, seconded by Representative Ballard. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes, and that is as amended.
As amended.
That's what we have. That's why I don't have Jill chasing me. All right, we'll now move on. The next budget that we have is the Legislative Coordinating Council. So, Dylan.
So the Legislative Coordinating Council had a budget request of $1 million. Okay, that is identical to the approved with reappropriations. It's $1.8 million, identical to the amount as approved. The LBC did recommend to lapse the $274,947 in reappropriations for the Legislative Coordinating Council. With that, I would stand for questions on 25.
Committee, any questions? All right, you may move on to 26.
On 26, the legislative request is, for 26, is $965,242. The change from the approved is $585,569, or 37.8% negative. That's due to item number 2, which is the deletion of the constituent relationship management software. That's not actually deleting the funding for it. The motion and the bill last year, just the rough and tumble of the process, actually put the money in the budget for the LCC, and so this is just sort of backing that money back out. And also, it's was funded in FY 2025, and so that's sort of dealing with it that way. All other adjustments total about $164,431 SGF, and that request reduces salaries and wage expenditures from 25 due to one-time costs incurred for an agency retirement, and a portion of the reappropriations are retained in contractual services due to anticipated computer programming and other fees associated with legislative initiatives. With that, I would stand for questions on the LCC budget, but I would really turn it over to Tom to answer questions.
Committee, are there any questions? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to have this passed out to the Appropriations Committee. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass out the Legislative Coordinating Council budget to appropriations.
All right, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Speaker Pro Tem Carpenter. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Now we are on to the Legislative Research Department. Dylan.
So looking at the Legislative Research Department, let's turn immediately to page 2. So the 2025 agency request is $5.5 million. That is a reduction of $50,000 SGF. That was a choice by the director to lapse $50,000 of the total reappropriation totaling $161,741. There was a decision made by the LBC to go ahead and take that full reappropriation of the $161,741. And there were no other adjustments made to 25. Looking at 26 on page 4. The 26 agency request is $5.6 million. The change from approved is about $276,000. That's largely attributable to an enhancement. So there's an enhancement request of $118,308 and one FTE position. This is based on a base salary of $90,000 for a database analyst, and that enhancement was deleted by the LBC as part of the global. And then there's a request that adds about $164,654 for salaries and wages, excluding the database administrator. And that request funds increases for group health insurance, hospitalization, as well as anticipated retirements from senior employees. The LBC made no changes there, and the agency request deletes about $7,000 for other adjustments, and that's largely related to some travel expenditures that are going down in FY 2026. With that, I would stand for questions before turning it over to Shirley Morrow, the director.
All right, committee, are there any questions? Speaker Hawkins.
So we took out, as part of our global motion in the LBC, the data, I believe it was what was it called, data something manager?
Database analyst. So what's happened over the last, and I'm speaking as an analyst, not as a representation of KLRD. The request was to have a database analyst in order to be able to manage a variety of databases we are now responsible for by statute.
So my opinion, and my opinion only, everybody's got to vote on this, but I do think that we do have a need for that data analyst, that database analyst in research. Research, I believe, is running pretty thin. They're lean. And for them to do some of the things, we got lots of new databases in the research department, and I do believe we're going to need that person. So I would make a motion that we put the one FTE back in. So research will have that database analyst and the associated money that it takes to fund that.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion by the speaker. It's seconded by the minority leader, Woodard.
Are those the individuals that are entering all of this, or the ones that we call to the office whenever we have a problem and they have to fix it? Tell me specifically, what are we referring to?
Certainly. So this is not like Kay Lois, and this is not like an IT person to go out there. This is a person that would standardize like our data sets, maintain a database inside of our own internal IT systems, so that, and then maintain and clean the existing data to give us the ability to provide reports to you. There's a whole variety. I mean, I could talk your ears off about fiscal side, but we're completely rebuilding the way we store and report data on the fiscal side in order that, you know, we have a long-term ability to look at expenditures and also to make it available to the public through data visualizations, both by Power BI and Tableau. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. I mean, there's a licensing database that KLRD is now responsible for tracking all the various licenses that are issued, and that was tied to the ability to offer licenses to veterans. So, I mean, it's just all these little pieces of data that KLRD has become responsible for over time. But I would once again say that Shirley Morrow is the director and is able to address this issue.
I thank you for that explanation, and if you explain it in such a way that what the speaker is saying, if we're doing all this building in the database, we should not be cutting back on what it is that you're trying to grow or trying to meet whatever need that we don't have, especially if it's new. So certainly I would be in favor of that. I just wanted to make sure I get an idea of what it is, because that other IT person, I want to make sure we're not cutting on them because they are spread so thin, they're running everywhere.
There's no reduction to KLOIS. This is an addition to KLRD in order to basically allow all our data sets to talk to each other.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Shirley, did you have any more input that you'd like to share?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee. On the database manager, no, I think Dylan did a good description on that. The only other item I just wanted to discuss briefly is in the current year, 2025, we actually had lapsed 50,000 of the reappropriation, and truly respect the Legislative Budget Committee's taking of the additional reappropriation. I did have two scanning technicians that I wanted to bring in for a few months. Using reappropriation is a good fix because it's a one-time cost. We have a lot of documents, old documents, and I'm trying to create additional office space, and I'm trying to move and store some of our documents digitally so that we can create some more physical office space. And so at, 50,000 of that reappropriation to cover those temporary positions would be appreciated, but that was the only other.
All right, any questions for Shirley? All right. See none. Speaker Hawkins, did you? Nope. All right. We haven't voted on the budget yet. Right. Oh, so no more discussion on the motion. Sorry about that. I kind of got lost track of thought. All right. Seeing no other discussion, Speaker Hawkins, you may close on your motion. All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Any other discussion on the budget for KLRD? Speaker Hawkins.
Chairman, do we have to do anything about, the two scanning techs? Do we have to do anything about that, or is that already taken care of in here?
We could go ahead and have a motion to put the 50,000 in from the reappropriation for the scanning of the documents so they can have more office space.
Well, I would move to put the 50,000 in so we can get the scanning techs in there too.
Okay, so we got a motion by the speaker, seconded by Representative Ballard. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Speaker Hawkins, you may close. All right. Committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. All right, now, any other further discussion in regards to the budget for Kansas Legislative Research Department? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to pass this budget out as amended. Speaker Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out the KLRD budget to the Appropriations Committee.
All right, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Ballard. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Now, the next budget we have is the Office of the Reviser of Statutes. Dylan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Moving immediately to page 2 of the Reviser of Statutes. So the agency request is about $5 million. That's about $588 below the approved budget with reappropriations. It's about a 10% reduction from the approved. The reduction is as a result of lapsing the reappropriation. I would note that that was in the agency request, so that was not an LBC action taken, but that was a decision made by the Reviser of Statutes. So I would note that. On page 3, if you look at other adjustments, there is some shuffling of expenditures a little bit, adjusting to travel into unclassified regular compensation. Nothing major. Turning to page 4. So the agency request is $5.1 million. The change from the approved is about $80,000 or 1.6%. There are no enhancement requests as part of this budget. The salaries and wage increase is about $117,048. Okay, that's a little bit of unclassified regular compensation, group health insurance, and capers. Contractual services request leads about $36,000, and most of that is in travel and job-related conference fees. With that, I would turn it over to Gordon, unless you have questions.
Committee, are there any questions? Speaker Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does this, the salary and wages is number 2, is that the amount that we discussed in LCC on the reviser's salary?
I know that's been discussed, but it's really a question for Gordon at this time. I mean, I can see that it was part of the agency request, but there's an early portion of it.
Okay.
Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Gordon Self, Reviser of Statutes. The action by the LCC taken with regard to the reviser salary, at this point, I'm absorbing it within my current salary and wages. When that motion was made, there wasn't, let's say, an equivalent amount added to our budget at that point.
Any further questions? I see none. I would then entertain a motion to pass this budget out of this committee to appropriations. Speaker Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we pass the reviser's budget out to the Appropriations Committee.
All right, you've heard the motion by the speaker. Is there a second? Second by Speaker Pro Tem. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. And now I believe we're on to our final budget, which is the Legislative Division of Post Audit. Dylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for legislative post audit, let's move immediately to page 2. So the total agency request in 25 is $3.6 million. The change from approved is $364,673. That number is largely due to lapsed reappropriations. So the total SGF reappropriation was $382,155. The agency on its own initiative lapsed $364,673. That amount was increased to the full amount of the reappropriations amount by LBC, which adds about $17,000 to the total reappropriations lapse. And there were no other adjustments to 25. Unless there's any questions, I'll turn to page 4. The agency is requesting $3.6 million. That change from approved is a negative $6,200, or about 0.2%. There was a deletion for accountants and auditors. There's sort of like a triannual audit that Chris can talk to you about in more detail if you're interested. And there's all other adjustments. The request includes about $43,802, and that's largely attributable to group health insurance. There's $3,239 related to capers, and there's also a peer review expenditures about $15,000. Oh, this is the auditors is a separate thing. I apologize, that's my mistake. Auditors is a separate issue that they had that doesn't occur every year, and the peer review is the triannual item that's added for $15,000. With that, I would stand for questions, and of course, Chris is available too for details.
All right, thank you, Dylan. Committee, are there any questions? Any questions for Chris? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to pass this out. Speaker Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we pass out the Legislative Division of Post-Audit Budget to the Appropriations Committee.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Second. Seconded by the Speaker Pro Tem. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Now that concludes all of the budgets that we have today in regards to the legislature. And the next meeting of this committee will be scheduled, probably not within the next legislative, or 2026 legislative session, because we probably won't have one for the remainder of this session. So we are adjourned.